Greetings, my fellow YouTubers. This is a shot of whiskey, and this video is mostly to kill time until my next project is actually done. But also, I wanted to, I guess you could say, vent about something that happened to me recently. But I'm really wanting to do it because it taught me a valuable lesson, and it's something that I think also applies to what I'm doing here on YouTube, as well as the possible podcast that I mentioned earlier well, in a previous video, I should say. So, what's going on? I'm working on my novel. I finally have actually started to write things down. I've got most of chapter one basically done, but it's been done in a constricted version. It's shorter. It's got like half, maybe even so much a third of the information that I actually want to be in there. And it's because I'm taking a fiction writing class at the college that I work at. We have two stories that we're supposed to submit. Now, the second one that I did was chapter one of my story. Now, I only felt comfortable about doing this because, like 2 days before the assignment was actually due, I had spoken with my instructor. It was a conference day for everybody. We had like 15 minutes to talk to her and whatnot. And she actually recommended that I do my chapter idea because that's what I was passionate about. That was the reason I took the class. And she thought that I would actually care more to focus on getting it done if I did that rather than the other option that I had, which was supposed to be a post-apocalyptic world that was supposed to take place like 200 years into the future kind of thing, which I might still write that, but not for a while. Anyways, once these stories are submitted, they go through a peer review class. A peer review session in class. Usually we read 2 or 3 at a time. They're determined by the instructor. My particular story, it was me and one other person. He was a fellow nerd. In fact, we were the only 2 nerds in that class. Everybody else wanted to write a story that was depressing and about somebody going through an emo trip because mommy left them alone with daddy or something like that. And to be entirely honest, it got kind of dull. He and I were the first ones to do something nerd themed. We both were also doing something that was supposed to be funny, which I thought was great. Everybody else is doing these things that's supposed to make you feel sad and depressed, and here we are trying to make things that's going to give you a chuckle. Which I think that alone was part of the problem, but I'll get to that in a little bit. His story was reviewed first. His, for lack of better words, was like a Mad Max parody. As you can see here in the picture, I'm kind of poking fun at Rick and Morty. His was kind of basically the exact same fucking concept. But one of the major differences is the bad guys, just to show that he was being silly and ridiculous and not to be taken seriously, the bad guys were a cult of furries. Yeah, no joke. A cult of furries. I, for one, thought it was hilarious, but most of the people in the class didn't get it. They were still like, are we supposed to take this seriously? I don't understand. Why are they furries? This makes no sense to me, and I don't like furries because I have this weird opinion that they're all a bunch of perverts, even though it's only some. But anyways, getting back on a topic, I was the only one who expressed an interest in it. I think a lot of it is because I was also doing something apocalyptic, or it was an idea that I had. Also, I understand humor a lot better than everybody else in that class, apparently. None of them even knew or realized that it was a parody. As far as I was concerned, it was fucking obvious. Couldn't have been more obvious, and yet they still didn't understand it. I did point out that, although these were supposed to be short stories, his had potential to be a novel. It had that potential. In fact, one chapter could be focused on explaining why it's furries that are this group. How did they survive the apocalyptic thing that happened? Which, by the way, one of the things about his apocalypse story that I really liked was it was caused by some sort of bacteria that had mutated or evolved, or however you want to say it, that was found on various plants that humans consume. So I don't know what was in his mindset. I mean, he kind of made it sound like that he just didn't really have a backstory. He was just trying to go for something funny. I came up with two possible theories while we were there in class. But, anyways, that's not why we were there in class. When it came to my story, I had a feeling that nobody was going to understand it because of things that they had said about his story and things that they said about my stuff in the past. And wouldn't you know it, I was right. So, I'm going to go ahead and explain some of their picky points. So some of the smaller stuff is they did not like that the story was told from a first-person perspective, especially since there was a couple of moments where my character broke the fourth wall. They felt that it took away from the story. And it's like, well, you're probably taking the story too fucking seriously. There's a part in the story where the main character, and this is actually the opening scene, the main character is a professional thief and a woman. She is following a small party, for lack of better words, and it's dark out. This world has 3 moons, but all 3 of them are blotted out by the clouds. So there's basically no light. And she's got enough night vision to where she can actually see what the hell is going on, but if you want her to give out details, good fucking luck. Now, this is a world to where it's humans, elves, dwarves, and orcs. They're in an area that's almost completely human. So she's describing one of the 4 members of this group as possibly being an orc. And everybody's like, well, why does she go into more detail? Why does she think he's an orc other than he's tall? Because it's the only thing she has to go by, you fucking morons. Learn to read. Dear God. Now, they did bring up some good points. Some good points. Such as, I make up my own plant life in this world. You guys heard of a redwood tree? Well, I came up with a bluewood tree. I also came up with a type of berry called the Vlep berry, which in my mind is basically a blueberry that's orange. That's the way I describe a Vlep berry. And she also, the main character has some magic ability, not a lot. And the one spell that you see in the parts that I had written is she has the ability to summon a vine, and she uses that vine to basically act as an arm to extend her reach so that she can grab something without alerting the people who are there in the group. And she succeeds, barely. But, so yeah, I could have described the vegetation more, especially since it's clear and obvious that they're not real-world plants. So I do agree with that. And that was something I was hoping to do more of had it been the full version of the story. Which, by the way, the only reason why it wasn't the full version that I wanted to do is we had a word cap, which had to be at least 2,000, but no more than 2,700. So I was getting close to the 2,700 mark as it was, so I took out a lot of stuff. Oh yeah, and another thing that they said that I agreed with was the names of the people that I put in were kind of confusing. This is actually one of the reasons why the story is taking me so long to write, is I don't like the names that I come up with people. Even as soon as I do think I've got something I like, I end up hating it the next time I look at it. And one person in the class is dyslexic, so hearing her say that she had a hard time reading these words, I'm like, okay, you know what, that's a very good point. I honestly am valuing your input on this more than anything else I've heard in this class, and that was honest to God true. So maybe I'll talk with her more about some other ideas on names, so it'd be easier for her to read. So as for the main gripes, the things that I actually wanted to vent about because these people are so fucking stupid. The first one is, why is a human able to use magic? Apparently, there was like 4 people in the class who were like, humans don't have magic abilities unless they have talisman. How is she able to use magic? You clearly need to learn more about fantasy. For fuck's sakes. I mean, look at the image that I have going on here. Know who that is? That's Merlin. Human being able to use magic. Yes, sometimes depending on what's going on, he'll use a wand, but that depends on the type of spell that he's using. Sometimes all he has to do is wave around his fingers or make a motion or whatnot. Depends on what's going on. Why? He's a wizard. He is trained. You don't have to have a talisman for a human to be able to use magic. Again, that depends on the reality. Here's another example. Lena Inverse from one of my all-time favorite anime, Slayers. She has talisman, but they're not so that way she can use magic. They're so that way she can be able to use to amplify her abilities. So like for those of you who play Skyrim, you know how there's certain attacks that you do, they're worth X amount of damage points. The talisman that Lena Inverse has will basically be like increasing the power tenfold. Plus, that particular spell that she's holding, there's no way in hell she'd be able to do that if she didn't have the talisman because her body would rip itself apart. So, the talisman are more like an aid in her case. But she can do magic without it. She can do magic completely naked if she wanted to, which actually she has before. Well, I guess a towel doesn't really make her naked, but pretty damn close. Anyways, point being, these people are idiots. They clearly have no idea what they were talking about when it came to fantasy. The next really big issue is what reason do I have for having the main character being a woman? And a lot of it is because I'm a man, they didn't really see why I would make such a change. Now, I can kind of understand this because I will admit there are some points in the story that did sound a little weird. Although I disagree with him on certain points. There's one moment where she got hurt, and the first person who came to rescue her is someone who she likes, but she doesn't like the idea of looking like a vulnerable damsel in distress with this guy. But with most other guys, she wouldn't necessarily have a problem with. Apparently, they seem to think that that's not how a woman thinks, and I call bullshit on that. I grew up with 4 women. I can definitely guarantee you they think like that. At least some of them do. But the main reason why I wanted to point this out is I do have my reasons. There are things that take place later on in the story in which it would not make sense if she were a man. Plus, when I do my role playing, I'm usually, not always, but usually a human woman. I am also usually a rogue. I actually, ironically enough, I don't really like doing magic-themed classes. So that's one of the reasons why I'm usually a rogue. The next one, which actually kind of relates to what I just brought up about the whole damsel in distress thing, they didn't like that she needed to be helped by a man, which I just find absolutely ridiculous. It's like, well, sometimes people need help, and like it or not, sometimes the gender is irrelevant. So, I suppose one of the main reasons is why did I want this part to happen. Part of it is with this novel being comedy, I was setting things up to produce some jokes. But also, I did not want her to be a Mary Sue. I don't like Mary Sues. And part of the problem is, I guess that kind of depends on how you personally want to define a Mary Sue. I actually, there was like about a year or so ago, I was looking up different websites that had different definitions for Mary Sues, and for the most part, they're somewhat consistent. And unfortunately, my main character fits a lot of those descriptions. So a lot of the jokes that I'm planning to have going on or events, I'm hoping will weaken those particular causes because I don't want her to seem perfect. I want her imperfections to be one of her main characteristics. Especially since most Mary Sues are fucking annoying. Oh, speaking of which, here's some perfect examples. Almost every single one of these websites that I looked at, I remember this very well, had Bella Swan as an example of a Mary Sue. Now, I will admit, I'm not very knowledgeable on Twilight, thank God, but from what I do know, I don't really know if I would call her a Mary Sue, although I guess in a way it would make sense. It's like she can't do anything wrong. But I suppose a better example would be Captain Marvel. I mean, especially if you want to put into the current movie, at least from what I understand. I have some knowledge of her from the comics, and I hated the bitch. I never liked her. Even if the whole Brie Larson being an SJW thing never happened, I probably wouldn't have watched the movie because I've never had an interest in the character. I've heard that Rey from the recent Star Wars movies is a Mary Sue. I don't know. I haven't seen those movies. In fact, the most canon experience that I've had is I got a Lego Star Wars game for my son recently, and he's just gotten to the levels where you start playing as Rey. And I'm like, okay, I can kind of see it, but again, this is also a Lego Star Wars game. They're going to change things for the sake of it being a Lego Star Wars game. But yeah, I want to avoid her being a Mary Sue. So the way that I see it is have her have flaws, have her need to be helped by a guy from time to time. The last one, and this one genuinely like pissed me off. Like I was almost ready to get up and leave and tell everybody to go fuck themselves. The scene in which she hurts herself, part of it is that she was wearing a dress. The gripe is, as I'm trying to explain why she was in a dress and not trousers or pants like some of the people wanted, is because of the cultural norm of their particular town. Women there, especially the main character, typically wear dresses. Usually they only wear pants if there's like some sort of a necessity. And since she's trying not to be caught, she's trying to prevent people from speculating as to why she's wearing pants. But apparently, since everybody in that class, including the guys, are feminists, they're like, well, that's so offensive. You're oppressing her. And it's like, no, it's a cultural norm. It's not a legal requirement. Okay, you see this image right here that I've got going on? This is a well, fuck, what are they called? A modded version of Isolde from Skyrim. You know, pretty nice image. I actually quite like the quality of it. She's wearing a dress. Almost every single woman in Whiterun is wearing a dress. The only example that I could think of that's an exception is oh fuck, what's her name? She's the elf who serves as the Jarl's bodyguard. Irilith. Irilith is her name. She's the only exception that I can think of. I mean, there might be another one running around the town, but she's the only one I could think of. Cultural norms. That's the thing. And speaking of that concept, here's Sylgia or something like that. She's wearing pants, but she's also not from Whiterun. She's from that small town of, what was it, Shorestone, I believe. It's a mining community. If you're not gonna wear pants, why the fuck are you there? Cultural norms. I swear, it's like these people thought that I was saying that every single woman is forced to wear a burqa on this island, but they're not burqas because I'm not trying to appropriate Muslim culture or whatever. You know, it's like, no, it's not the same thing. And this is the problem when you're trying to do a somewhat believable fantasy story to a bunch of butthurt feminists who already seem to think that you hate women. Yeah, I've actually said some things here and there throughout the class where they're like, oh, you hate women. Yeah, we think your character's a misogynist. It's like, well, yeah, you probably think that because you're a moron. Oh, that's right, you're a feminist. You are a moron. So yeah, that's my story. That's my story. Moral of the story is target audience. Keep in mind who your target audience is. These people, not necessarily it. Oh, speaking of which, there's another thing that kind of pissed me off. So they didn't. I can't believe I just thought of this. They did not like that I did a chapter of my novel rather than doing a short story, because that's what the assignment was. Well, you fuckers, the instructor had just said I could do it, so it's none of your goddamn business. And you think these people would think about that? Like, we had the conferences just a couple days prior. You don't think that she and I would have talked about it? And to top it off, I mentioned that there's that word cap. 2,000 to 2,700 words. Not including me. There's only two other people who were within that range. And those two people were pretty damn on the low side of the list. Like 2,050, 2,175. I mean, they were low. Mine ended up being something like 25, 26, somewhere around there. Close to the 2,700 mark, but not over it. Everybody else, 1,800, 1,900. Well, you didn't do the assignment right either. In fact, this Thursday, we've got the last reading assignment. This is just one person because his is 3,200 words. He exceeded the maximum by 500 words. You want to talk about not doing the assignment? Look in the mirror, you fucking fucks. You know what? I'm glad this class is almost done. Everybody in this class, with the exception of like 2 or 3 people, are really pissing me off. And the instructor's actually getting kind of close to it too. I like her on small scales, but you know what? Seeing how much of a feminist she is, and has been as of late, has really, really been irking me as of late, because it's completely clouding her ability to think like a fantasy writer or a fiction writer in general. And you know, even if my universe had oppression, so what? It's a fictional piece, and sometimes oppression is a necessity. Fuck's sakes, I hate people. Anyways, God, this has already gone over 20 minutes. Anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and shut up, and I promise the next video is not going to be me ranting. I'll be responding to something, so it won't just be my voice you'll be hearing. In the meantime, peace out, everybody.